Right now, I want to talk about the rocks and more rocks, all sizes, shapes, and locations. Their hindrances, their uses, and conveniences as well. Wherever one looked, there they were. Wherever one walked or worked, there they were. Every tillable field was surrounded with rock fences, some built with great care and precision, and others either thrown atop of each other or perhaps falling apart because of having been built years and years ago. One field led into another, with an opening wide enough for a very wide horse-drawn vehicle to go through. You see, the farmer, in the course of working the fields, had to use a different type of vehicles. Heavy-duty lumber wagons for some phases of work, harrowing equipment to break up the large pieces of soil after plowing. They had to use large raking machinery and equipment to gather the mown hay into rolls for picking up and placing into the barns. Sometimes the wagons were drawn by two heavy workhorses because the loads were so big they needed something strong for pulling them. Some of the fields had wet spots into which rocks were gathered and thrown. Now between these rocks, bushes grew, even trees grew there. Blackberry thorn plants would be there. High blueberry bushes would be there. Also, between the rocks and bushes, you could find rabbits and snakes, weasels, and other animals. Many birds found safety there too. In back of our barn, we had two such little islands on which we found berries of all kinds. Blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, and in many places near them there would be beautiful wild strawberries, the plants growing a foot or more high, trying to reach the sunshine. In comparison to the cultivated berries, they were very tiny, but very, very sweet. Now, to continue with the rock fences, I suppose for reasons of utilizing the land to the best advantage many, many years ago before we came to Salem, former owners planted apple trees, pear trees, plum trees, cherry trees, even the prickly thornberry bushes along the fences. These trees acted also as windbreakers from one field to another, as well as bearing fruit for the farmer. All the fields were separated by fences, cleared from the land into perhaps 3, 4, or 5 acres each, depending upon the makeup of the land. Some of our fields were larger than others. Some of them had huge boulders in the middle or elsewhere. These boulders could not be moved or removed. They were so deep in the ground that only dynamiting could break them up. Around these, we picked beautiful wild strawberries. I never saw a large cultivated berry as a child. All we knew about them were the tiny wild ones, and we knew where to find them. Not only were individual fields separated by stone fences, but farms were likewise separated in the same manner. The fences were the boundaries. On one side, we owned the land, and on the other side, the other farmer owned his property. Even the woods were separated by stone wall fences, designating property boundaries. I remember while going into the woods for nuts, and we used to pick hazelnuts and chestnuts and berries and mushrooms, and believe it or not, apples, because there were apple trees in the woods among the bushes and so forth. We found fences there too. It seems that years and years before we came there, someone must have cleared land there. The reason why I say this is that deep in our woods, where a cute bubbling brook crossed against a knoll, there were remnants of an old house, years and years and years old. A chimney, a broken part of the foundation of the old house, and of course the foundation was made of rocks. There were no signs of the building other than that, but there were lilacs and honeysuckle growing there. Who knows when there was a building or who had lived there hundreds of years ago? There were broken down fences there too. Now we used to go there quite often and listen to the brook babbling along the pebbles, going on in its merry way. Now we weren't the only farm that had the remnants of old house. Other farmers had the same in deep in their woods. The country roads had, and perhaps to this day in many places still have, stone wall fences on either side, separating the road from the private properties. Where highways are built now, of course, all this is destroyed. Going to Aunt Mary's and Barbara's place in Salem, you can see what I mean. Now, we lived quite a ways from the town road, having to follow a long lane to get to the house. Of course, on either side of this lane was a stone wall fence with wide openings here and there, and wooden bars across them to keep cattle out, especially if it was a garden or a hayfield or whatever else. Now, before we came into the lane to come to the house, we had a big gate. So somebody had to jump out of the wagon, open the gate, wait for the horse and wagon to go through, and then close the gate and come back on the wagon to go home. These gates, we had to make sure were in good order and always closed when not in use. Our lane had a gate to that town road. Now, along the lane on either side, beside the stone wall fences, we had lovely black oxheart cherry trees. I used to climb them as well as the boys and fill up on the cherries. They were so good. When the cherries were ripe, I think we all had dirty, juicy faces and black tongues from eating so many of them. We had a stone wall fence starting at one end of our barn, extending out to our neighbor's farm, Chayinski's place. Now, the back of the barn had no fence because it formed part of the boundary to the back lot. But again, starting from the other end of the barn was a stone wall fence to surround the barnyard where the cows were gathered before milking, after milking, or before being sent out to graze in the pastures. In back of the barn, where these little islands of rock and bushes were, I found a very unusual flower. It's probably extinct now. I don't know. But it was a pretty blue. It was growing wild, and it was called a gentian. Gention. I found both the closed gentian and the fringe gentian there. We used to have competitions in school every year with the children trying to be the first one to find and bring in a specimen of wild flowers. In June, the child bringing in the most flowers, of course being the first one to bring in that flower, got a prize. Usually it was a little booklet on flowers. Another rare flower beside the gentian was the pink or the yellow lady slipper. How we hunted for both of them. In our woods, we did find the pink lady slipper. The yellow one was even more rare, and we found that one on property across from where Uncle Bruno lives now. It was then owned by a family named Dunn. Needless to say, I think we, my brothers and I, were the only ones to find these. We probably destroyed the whole species because we pulled them out of their natural habitat in order to be the one to bring the flower to school. That will never be known now because homes have been built there in those places. I don't think they have these competitions there anymore because there are no more little one-room schoolhouses in Salem, or, for that matter, hardly anywhere else. There must be somewhere in the United States, but the number must be very, very small. Everywhere, centralized schools have been built, and they replace the little one-room schoolhouses, and the children are bused or transported to them.